Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 459 for the 6th of August, 2017. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia. A fine example of winter today, I think. Cool and crisp and scattered clouds, I think. Looking out the window here of the studio, well, there's some sun shining. Maybe I think it's going to turn out to be a very nice day. I'm going to have a fun day, folks. I am. Later on today, later on this afternoon, I'm heading downtown Sydney to a place called Harpoon Harry's. Harpoon Harry's, where our very own Maynard will be doing a trivia afternoon. Looking forward to that. If you're in Sydney and you have time, check out Harpoon Harry's around about 3 o'clock or so this afternoon for trivia with Maynard. And I think I'll need a little bit of amusement, a little bit of relaxation this afternoon after getting out this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone, which is chock-a-block, brimming over, and a mixed bag. We're going to start with a report, the welcome return of our reporter Mandy-Lee Noble, the Diet Skeptic, who hasn't been on the show for a while. Mandy is going to talk about fluoride in the drinking water system here in Australia and some of the efforts in getting that removed. But I, for one, I'm glad that there's fluoride in our drinking water whenever I chew my food. The teeth seem to work okay. Then following that, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's the Eat Less Diet with Professor Stefan sojka. Stefan, of course, the other co-host of the Skeptic Zone who makes an appearance from time to time. Then we have an ongoing story, a very big story, as it's turning out. And there's so much to this story that I'm going to add some more updates at the end of the episode today. So stay tuned for that. This is all about the movie Vaxxed touring the country. I think it's just about done for the moment, but it's caused lots of controversy, lots of news coming out about it, but not the news the Vaxxed people wanted to come out. It's about the deception being used when it comes to this movie being shown around the country. And some of the he said, she said, or he said, she said, this sort of thing going on. We said this, no, you didn't. This happened, no, it didn't. We did this. It's quite a saga. It really is. But the upshot is, of course, this dreadful movie is being shown around the country. Well, it's probably, hopefully not at the moment. And, of course, there have been some videos released of interviews and so on from these events where the Vaxxed movie has been shown. Some of it's quite frightening. Anyway, we'll be covering some of that a little bit later on in the show. So much to cover and so much late-breaking news that there is even more updates at the end of the show. Then the continuing series of interviews with Ann Reid from the National Center for Science Education in Oakland, California this week, and tells us about her work into sequencing the genome of the Spanish flu epidemic, which cost millions of people their lives in the earlier part of last century. And some of the science behind discovering what that flu was all about is absolutely fascinating. Of course, we have Brew Ha Ha Science from Australia Science TV. This week, Ben Lewis tells us about T-Rex and could you outrun a T-Rex if you had to? I thought I couldn't, but maybe I could. Find out a bit later on. Then to round off the show, it's the Raw Skeptic Heidi Robertson discussing an article written by Jane Hansen about the real costs of a low vaccination rate in society. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and go into the cupboard and look to see if I still have some Dutch licorice left. I quite like Dutch licorice. I wonder if you're the same yourself. This is the stronger licorice. I know it is Dutch licorice. It might be known as something else in other parts of the world. It's more salty It's quite salty. I think Sweden too, maybe. There's quite salty licorice. If you're a licorice lover, why don't you run down to your cupboard and see if you have some to chew on that and enjoy the Skeptic Zone. That looks good enough to eat. Or does it? Here's the Diet Skeptic, Mandy-Lee Noble.
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. Mandy-Lee Noble here, dietitian and skeptic reporting from Brisbane. Welcome back, everyone, to the Diet Skeptic Report. It has been quite some time since my last report, but keen listeners may notice how much clearer this recording is. That is thanks to the Skeptic Zone, PayPal and Patreon supporters who enabled Richard to purchase this wonderful new microphone for me. So, thank you everyone. I hope this new piece of hardware leads to more frequent reports on the woo and pseudoscience that inhabits nutrition. Now for this week's report, which is one I've wanted to bring you for some time, but seems even more pertinent given proposed changes to state legislation in Tasmania. Kentish Council Mayor Don Thwaites is calling for the decision to fluoridate local water supplies in Tasmania to be handed to local councils. This may see Tasmania, the first state in Australia to mandate the fluoridation of drinking water in 1953, follow Queensland in scrapping an effective public health intervention in the regional and remote communities that need it the most. The World Health Organization recognises that both excessive and inadequate intake of fluoride can have negative effects. This is from the World Health Organization website. Public health actions are needed to provide sufficient fluoride intake in areas where this is lacking, so as to minimise tooth decay. This can be done through drinking water fluoridation, or when this is not possible, through salt or milk fluoridation. Excess fluoride intake usually occurs through the consumption of groundwater, naturally rich in fluoride, or crops that take up fluoride and are irrigated with this water. Fluoridation is further supported by the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, who claim that water fluoridation reduces cavities in children and adults by 25% and lists the fluoridation of drinking water as one of the 10 great public health achievements of the United States. In Australia, a 2011 government report of the rates of dental decay in children found a correlation between high rates of tooth decay and low socioeconomic status. However, it also found that children from the states and territories with the lowest rates of fluoridation had the highest rates of tooth decay. Interestingly, the difference in tooth decay for 12-year-olds in states with higher rates of fluoridation was less consistent with socioeconomic status. It seems that where you have fluoridated water, rates of tooth decay will reduce most in kids from lower socioeconomic groups. In my own state of Queensland, the implementation of water fluoridation has been far from successful. In 2007, the then Premier, Anna Bligh, successfully passed legislation for mandatory water fluoridation, some 50 years after other Australian states. However, the public health victory was short-lived. In 2012, the newly elected LNP Premier, Campbell Newman, handed the decision of water fluoridation back to the councils. Local governments do not have the processes, resources or experts in place to make informed decisions regarding public health issues. When water fluoridation comes up for review by councils, they are inundated by misinformation from organised anti-fluoride groups who often do not even reside in the local area. Since 2012, 2/3 of Queensland councils have opted out of water fluoridation under the pressure of anti-fluoride lobby groups. Many of the councils that have stopped fluoridating drinking water are in regional and remote areas that may also have reduced access to dental services. Having investigated water fluoridation in Australia, I found that there is one thing that the anti-fluoride groups have right. The benefits of water fluoridation diminish with increasing high socioeconomic status and access to dental services. Anti-fluoride campaigners use this argument to question the necessity of water fluoridation. Ironically, public health advocates use the same argument to support water fluoridation. This is because public health advocates and healthcare workers understand that it is socioeconomic status and access to health services that are the biggest barriers to healthcare in Australia. Essentially, community water fluoridation is an issue of social justice and health equity. Where the anti-fluoride campaigners have it completely wrong is the claim that water fluoridation is unsafe or untested. I will provide a quick list of responses to some of the common claims made by anti-fluoride lobbyists from Queensland Health and the National Health and Medical Research Council. Of course, I would love to completely address all the claims made by the anti-fluoride campaigners. However, there are far too many and they are far too broad to be completely addressed at any one time. Groups who oppose evidence-based public health measures often adopt a scattergun approach, leaving experts unable to adequately address every uninformed claim. Anyway, here are some responses to common fluoride myths. Fluoride does not cause cancer. Scientific studies have failed to establish a link between water fluoridation and cancer. Cancer rates in the rest of Australia are not different to those in Queensland, where until recently few communities have had access to fluoridated water. Fluoride does not cause allergies. Scientific studies have failed to establish a link between water fluoridation and allergies or other immunological effects. Fluoride is an element already found in food and water. Fluoride does not cause arthritis. No difference has been found in the incidence of arthritis in fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. No country has banned fluoride. Some countries may use salt or milk as an alternative to increase exposure to fluoride. Fluoride does not cause bone fractures. Rates of bone fractures have not increased in communities that have introduced water fluoridation, and water fluoridation has been endorsed by Osteoporosis Australia. Water fluoridation does not cause excessive dental fluorosis. Most fluorosis is barely detectable and does not damage teeth, as opposed to dental decay, which is unsightly, painful, and expensive to repair. And lastly, water fluoridation is not mass medication. Water fluoridation simply adjusts the amount of a substance already found naturally in the water to a level that is beneficial to teeth. Finally, Skeptic Zone listeners, if you are familiar with the work of the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, a cursory glance at the website or Facebook pages of an organised anti-fluoride group will seem very familiar. Despite being two very different health issues, with two very different health interventions, there are significant similarities in the conspiracy theories of those who oppose them. There is also a surprising crossover in the celebrities who support both the anti-vaccination and the anti-fluoride movements. This includes 2015 Ben Spoon winner and celebrity chef Pete Evans, who wrote the following statement on social media. I'm concerned about mass fluoridation of public water, and I strongly believe that if people want to add fluoride to their drinking water, then they should. But it should be a choice that each person has the ability and right to make for their own household. Well, Pete, if only public health interventions were that easy. Thank you, listeners. Until next time, this has been the Diet Skeptic.
Hi, I'm Professor Stefan Sojka from the Miracle Weight Loss Academy, and I'm here to tell you about our new Miracle Weight Loss program, Eat Less and Exercise More. The secret to weight loss will finally be revealed to you if you sign up to this amazing program now. For just 12 easy payments of $395.95, you will get the complete Eat Less and Exercise More 18 DVD set, the 4-volume Eat Less and Exercise More book series, 22 Eat Less and Exercise More audio CDs, as well as the exclusive membership to the Eat Less and Exercise More website, the Eat Less and Exercise More podcast, vodcast, Facebook page and Twitter posts, in which you will finally have revealed to you the secret to weight loss. You can never get the weight off without the secrets that will be revealed to you in this Miracle Weight Loss Academy program. Sign up to Eat Less and Exercise More and start losing weight today. But that's not all. If you sign up and start the Eat Less and Exercise More program within the next 30 minutes, we will also give you the amazing relaxation program, Lie Down and Close Your Eyes, within which you will discover the miraculous secret to eliminating stress. Eat Less and Exercise More. The secret to weight loss is only 12 easy payments of $395.95 away. Go to eatlessandexercisemore.com now.
As we mentioned last week on the Skeptic Zone, the documentary, pseudo-documentary, Vaxxed, From Cover-Up to Catastrophe. I don't need to tell you too much about that. I'm sure you're very well aware of that story by now, about that documentary produced by Andrew Wakefield, Mr. Andrew Wakefield. Well, the Vaxxed team, as they love to call themselves, the Vaxxed team, have been in Australia, aided and abetted by the Looney Tunes at the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network. I'm at their website at the moment. I notice, however, their main logo still says AVN, and in little writing underneath it, it says Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network. So I wonder what they were legally supposed to do with their logo. Nevertheless, there's a page here on their website entitled Vaxxed, with a big poster from the movie, which has a syringe faced down against a sea of black, and it seems that there's gas coming out of the syringe. Makes a lot of sense, of course. And the page says, our 2017 Australian Vaxxed Tour screenings are here. The Vaxxed team and the AVN, not the AVSN, Skeptics, the Vaxxed team and the AVN will be touring down the east coast of Australia from July 23rd to August 5th, 2017. At every screening along the tour, and they list a series of names from the Vaxxed team who will be there to take questions from the audience after screenings. Chief amongst those would be Brian Hooker and Polly Tommy. It also says that the Vax team will be collecting stories after the screenings along the road on behalf of the US Vaxxed bus, and your stories will join the official Vax channels. Now, a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Raichi covered this issue of the Vaxxed bus when she interviewed Craig Egan, who goes around the United States following this Vaxxed bus, and pointing out to Dr. Raichi that the stories they collect are all anecdotal, and anybody can go along and tell them stories about their poor sick children and blame vaccination. There seems to be little or no vetting. Also on this page there is a list of the screenings so far. We have the Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Newcastle, Sydney, Campbelltown, which is near Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And it says down the bottom, join us along the tour for a screening, a gathering, story sharing, political meetings, and media interviews. This is a not-to-be-missed experience. Gee, I'm sorry I missed it. And right down the bottom there's a sort of questions, Q&A for your education. Question: is Vaxxed an anti-vaccination documentary? Answer: no. Well, the scientific community beg to differ. And here is a very brief excerpt from one of the meetings, and the voice you will hear is that of Polly Tommy, who is with the Vaxxed team.
Here's the thing. We still need to reach more people. We still need to help save them. But look at this. This black bus is your black box warning. It is the people's warning to the people to tell you that these vaccines are unsafe. They kill. These doctors, they kill.
I think that makes her position, at least, very clear. But I'd like to read to you the webpage report from ABC News, published on the 26th of July, 2017, by Tom Forbes, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes. And this refers to the screening of vaxxed up in Queensland on the Gold Coast. And the headline says, Gold Coast school tricked into allowing anti-vaccination film screening. A Gold Coast principal was hoodwinked into hiring out his school hall for a screening of a controversial anti-vaccination documentary, Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk says. The film, Vaxxed from Cover-Up to Catastrophe, was shown at Miami State High School on Tuesday night, despite the state government's strong stance in supporting vaccination. Quote, my preliminary advice is that there has been some misrepresentation to the school in question, end quote, Ms. Palaszczuk said. Quote, they conveyed to the principal that it was to be conveying information about organic produce, end quote. Earlier this month, Health Minister Cameron Dick urged residents to boycott the film that has caused controversy by linking measles, mumps, rubella vaccine to autism. Quote, we are incredibly strong about the need for people to be vaccinated, especially children, end quote, Ms. Palaszczuk said. Quote, I don't think they were very clear in their purpose, and I don't think they should have been allowed to present in such a manner, end quote. The incident is being investigated, and the Premier is waiting for a full briefing. Gold Coast public health physician Paul Van Binder said he was aware the film was going to be shown, but the location was kept secret until ticket buyers received a text message with the location late Tuesday afternoon. Now, as an aside from me, this fits into their overall cloak and dagger, conspiracy-minded approach. In other words, they know this movie's going to cause controversy anyway, but to have the attendees come along to the movie they don't want you to see by sending them text messages just before the showing adds to this conspiracy cloak and dagger undercover sort of appeal many people have to conspiracy theories, I think. We continue. Quote, we weren't aware that they were coming to a high school, and we're incredibly disappointed, as I'm sure the Minister will be, after all the work he's put in to improve vaccinations in Queensland, end quote. The health chief said the film confuses parents. Quote, it's very easy to frighten a parent, and no parent wants to do harm to their child, end quote, Dr. Van Binder said. Quote, there are 25% of parents who are unsure, because of all the noise about vaccines, about whether they should vaccinate. I think the danger is this is not for the 1.3% of Australians who are conscientious objectors, end quote. And that story comes to us by Tom Forbes, writing for the ABC News. Now, we mentioned that Canberra was on the list of locations where this movie was scheduled to be screened and has been screened. And unbelievably, the venue in Canberra was the Australian National University. We pick up the story published at skeptics.com.au on the 1st of August by Tim Mendham. Anti-vaccination film screened at Australian National University. The Australian National University's Science Department has played host to a screening of the controversial anti-vaccination film Vaxxed on Monday night. Details of how the booking was made are not yet clear, but the university has stated that, quote, the event was a private booking. It was not an ANU event. It was not in any way endorsed by the university. Any claim made by the hirers that claims ANU endorsement is false, end quote. The film was screened on campus at the Leonard Huxley Lecture Theatre. The venue for screenings of the film are only given to prospective attendees a few hours before the event. The Australian Anti-Vaccination Skeptics Network has uploaded videos of the event. It can be heard at one stage on a video of the Q&A session following the screening of the film that they are not allowed to film the audience, although interviews with attendees are shown later. Former AVSN President Merrill Dorey was the speaker at the ANU event alongside anti-vax proponents Brian Hooker, Suzanne Humphreys and the film producer Polly Tommy. Now, I've seen some of the video of the vaxxed team going into the university, past all the signs that say science. It's galling. It really is galling. And the university need to smarten up their act. They need to explain this. They really do. To let this group onto their campus to show this film is outrageous, frankly, outrageous. And I'll play now a very short clip of some of the advice that Polly Tommy was giving out afterwards during interaction with the audience to a young lady who was interested in becoming a missionary in Africa.
I know exactly where we're going to be putting you. Don't say I didn't warn you about my first mother, though. And what about you?
I'm wanting to go overseas, probably to Africa as a missionary with kids.
Oh, good for you.
Part of the reason I did say to Mum that I wanted to come tonight was because before I go, which I'm looking at going overseas, for my first mission trip in December.
Yes.
And I wanted to have that informed decision before I left, so that I could decide whether to get vaccinated or not for anything that they might try and pressure me into doing before I went.
Well, first of all, they are going to pressurise you.
Yes.
And you've got to look on vax.com. We mission trips where the 19-year-olds have not survived their flu vaccine.
Yeah.
So please research that. My advice is no.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100% no.
So it's mine. Yeah.
I mean, really, truly, it's any vaccine at any age, not worth it.
So, yes, not a good state of affairs. The vaxxed movie being shown up and down the east coast of Australia. As I said, aided and abetted by the Looney Tunes at the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, who must be enjoying another brief moment in the sun. And although it's all but over now, of course, the fear is that many of the impressionable parents who went along to this video, the screening of this movie, will now maybe not vaccinate their children or confirm their conspiracy theory beliefs, or they're going to try and persuade their friends and family not to vaccinate after seeing this load of codswallop. But again, I refer you to the interview Dr. H.E. did with Craig Egan on the Skeptic Zone number 456, the 16th of July. That's worth a listen to if you haven't heard that one already. But we will keep you up to date with any further developments on this whole sad saga. Stop the presses, hold the rolls. Here is some late-breaking news on this story. Since I recorded the pieces you just heard, more controversy has followed the vaxxed movie. It's been shown at the Crown Casino in Melbourne. Well, maybe that's appropriate if people want to gamble with their children's health. But more importantly, maybe, as a statement has just come out from the parents of Riley Hughes, the baby who died in 2015 at only 32 days old from whooping cough. And since then they have set up the foundation Light for Riley, which won the 2015 Australian Skeptics Fred Thornett Award for the promotion of reason. In a statement released from Light for Riley, Anti-Vaccination Tour of Australia prompts the donation of over 50,000 vaccines to children in developing countries. Last Sunday, we donated vaccines on behalf of a group of anti-vaccination activists who arrived in Australia, keen to spread their fear and misinformation to vulnerable parents. We have been blown away by the huge number of people who have echoed our sentiment and made similar donations of vaccines to UNICEF Australia. With their tour almost over, these activists can leave this weekend knowing their decision to come to Australia has meant that more than 50,000 children will now be protected from serious preventable diseases like measles and polio. Thousands and thousands and thousands of kids in developing countries will now be vaccinated. Just brilliant. Parents deserve good information about the risks and benefits of vaccines, and the information presented by these activists is discredited, misleading, and a danger to public health. With statements such as, quote, vaccines kill, end quote, and, quote, doctors are murdering our children, end quote, anti-vaccination messages can truly cost lives. What you have helped us to achieve is a huge win for public health. Thank you. Vaxxed team. If you ever decide to tour our country again, just know you will be indirectly responsible for the donation of thousands and thousands more vaccines. Signed, Riley's Mum and Dad.
AstronomyCast takes a facts-based journey through the cosmos as it offers listeners weekly discussions on astronomical topics ranging from planets to cosmology. Hosted by Fraser Kane of Universe Today and myself, Dr. Pamela Gay of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, this show brings the questions of an avid astronomy lover directly to an astronomer. Together, Fraser and I explore what is known and being discovered about the universe around us. Join us each week as we take a facts-based journey through the cosmos at astronomycast.com.
Now we bring you part 3 of our series of interviews with Ann Reid, the director of the National Center for Science Education based in Oakland, California. This week, Ann will tell us about her work into sequencing the genetic code of the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic. This epidemic killed millions of people. Climate change, we think of permafrost, and evolution, we think of what's on the wall up there. And I mentioned the permafrost because it is relevant to the complete coding sequence of the 1918 influenza virus. You have it on your wall. And just for our listeners, because it's such a fascinating story.
So back when I was a working scientist, I worked at a place called the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology that has an archive of tissue samples going back to the Civil War. And my job was to figure out how to do molecular biology on those old tissue samples. And one of the things that we worked on was the 1918 flu, which killed somewhere between 20 and 50 million people worldwide.
Which a lot of people don't know about.
Yeah. I think more people know about it now. It's gotten a lot more coverage in the last 10 years or so. But for many years it was forgotten. I mean, it did happen in the middle of World War I, and a lot of, or at the end of World War I, a lot of other things were going on.
It's also known as the Spanish flu.
Yes.
You've heard it referred to as that, right?
Yes. Yeah. And the reason for that is that when it broke out in Europe, most European countries had very strict press controls to try to have good news in their communities. So because to keep morale up during the war, and so they didn't allow the press to talk about the flu. But Spain didn't have a press embargo, so they did talk about it, and they ended up getting, getting the name tagged on them.
Why. I see.
Yeah, okay. That's why it's called the Spanish flu. It didn't originate in Spain. It wasn't worse in Spain than anywhere else. It just was in the news there. Okay. Anyway, we decided to see if we could get the genetic sequence of the virus from these tissue samples. There were about 77 or 78 samples from U.S. soldiers who died of the flu in 1918. And in 1918, viruses were not yet culturable, so no samples of the virus were preserved in laboratories. But we hoped that the sequence of the virus, that the genetic material of the virus would still be in the lungs of some of the soldiers who died of the flu. So it took us 7 years and we actually got most of the sequence from an Inuit Alaskan woman who died of the flu and was buried in permafrost. Wow. And so her lungs had been preserved. And that's
remarkable.
Where
Remarkable.
Yeah. It's quite a story. We were contacted by a man who had exhumed these bodies back in 1953. After our first paper was published, he offered to go back up and exhume the bodies again and send us more tissue, which we accepted. And when he went up and opened the gravesite again, there was only one body that was not decomposed, whereas there had been, I can't remember how many victims there were in Breivik mission. I think it was on the order of 85. They were all decomposed. The permafrost had started to freeze and thaw. It wasn't perma anymore. And the one body that was still intact was a very obese woman, and the fat had insulated her lungs.
For listeners who, especially in Australia, who don't have to deal with permafrost, this is a region of the world where the ground is essentially frozen because it's far enough north for the effects of the sun never quite to thaw the ice in the ground. But we hear stories of the permafrost is now being directly affected by global warming. Right?
Yeah. So even back in 2000, there were signs that this area was not staying frozen 365 days a year, year after year after year, that there had been thaw cycles. And that may have had something to do with it having been opened before. That grave had been opened before. It was after the war, after the flu, that the U.S. Army came in to Alaska and helped bury all of the dead. It was devastating. In the villages it got to, it was devastating. Alaska was not yet a U.S. state at the time. It didn't become a state until 1959.
Right.
But the Army did come in and bulldoze these mass graves that are found in villages all over Alaska, including Breivik Mission, where our sample was found.
And it's fascinating to gaze up to the wall there, and it's a lovely picture of the genetic sequence. But it was quickly evolving.
Yes, and the flu is always quickly evolving. That's its survival strategy. That its gene copying machinery is quite inaccurate, and so every time makes lots of mistakes,
right.
and it doesn't. I mean, it's a virus, so it doesn't have emotions, but it doesn't care. If some large number of the viral particles that are formed aren't complete, or if they have a mutation that means that they won't be able to infect the next victim.
It just does what it does.
If it has one, that's good. Then it can get into a cell and it can reproduce and it can keep the virus spreading.
Yeah, so that's why you were saying before, every year there's a different strain, and every year there's a slightly different vaccine because it evolves.
Right. The selective pressure on it, the evolutionary selective pressure on it is for the bits of the virus that stick up are the parts of the virus that the immune system sees. And so the immune system makes antibodies that are very, very specific to those spikes on the surface of the virus. So if the virus happens to get a mutation that changes the shape of that spike slightly, then that particular viral particle can infect somebody who was infected by the previous virus because the antibodies are not going to be as good a match.
Yeah.
So those are the ones that survive.
Yeah.
And those are the ones then that you get the next year. And so they're constantly monitoring the virus over the course of the off-season to see what changes are emerging. And then they make a decision in, I believe it's February, what strain they're going to put in the next year's vaccine based on what's emerging. So they may keep the old one if it looks like a new one hasn't really caught hold. But if it looks like a new strain has emerged that is different enough from the old one that people's immunity isn't working, then they put that strain into the vaccine for the next year. So it's a very imperfect science.
Well, yeah, it is, but it's certainly developing. But from the virus's point of view, it behooves it to have a coping mechanism.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. And so what we found with the 1918 flu is there's about, I can't remember, it's been a long time since I was really deep in the literature. I think there are about 20 amino acids that are on the surface of that spike that sticks out from the surface of the virus And the sort of home species for influenza viruses is wild birds, ducks and geese. And it circulates in ducks and geese, and it doesn't really make them sick. They're very well adapted to ducks and geese, and so those amino acids don't change because there's not really big immune pressure on the virus. So if you look at those 20 amino acids, you can make a very good guess as to where this virus came from. Did it come from birds? Did it come from pigs, where there is immune pressure on the virus, or from humans?
Swine flu?
Swine flu.
Yes.
Yeah. Swines can be infected by both avian strains and human strains. So for many years they were thought to be the mixing vessel where you get new varieties of flu developing. And there's some evidence that that's true, but there's also evidence that it can happen just in humans. Anyway, the 1918 flu, those 20 amino acids were all the avian strain, which they all matched sort of typical avian viruses. So that suggests that it had never circulated in humans before. And maybe that's why it was so ridiculously virulent is not the word. Contagious. That nobody had any immunity to it at all.
Yeah. And just to wrap up this talk about the flu, I've had the flu, you've had the flu over the years. It's very unpleasant. It's not a cold. It's a different thing. You feel dreadful. You're wiped out for a week or more, really. How does it actually kill people, and why were so many people killed by it back then? I mean, why didn't they just get the flu and feel dreadful for a couple of weeks and recover?
The vast majority of them did.
Did they?
Yeah.
Right.
And it killed some. It depends. The numbers are not perfect, but about 2% of the people who were symptomatic died. Generally, about 30% of people who get the flu don't even have any symptoms.
Really?
About 70% have symptoms, and those can vary from a very mild flu to what you're describing, this kind of really miserable for a couple of weeks, to dying. Most of the people who died didn't die directly of the virus. They died of a bacterial pneumonia. The virus comes in and it infects the epithelium cells that line your respiratory tract. And it kills them. And so it leaves your respiratory tract really vulnerable to bacterial infection.
Right.
So something like 90, probably 95% of people who died in 1918 actually died of a bacterial pneumonia. But about 5% of people got this very, they call it fulminant viral pneumonia, where instead of just killing the epithelium in the nasal passages, it got deep into the lungs. It denuded the capillaries in the base of the lungs. The lungs flooded with liquid, and basically the victims drowned. It was very violent, rapid death. The victims turned a color they called heliotrope. It's like a lavender blue color. They called it heliotrope cyanosis. This was super fascinating about doing that study, is we had to go back and read all of the studies about what was going on. What can we learn from what they saw clinically? What can we learn from what they saw epidemiologically in different towns? Anyway, some number of people died of this primary viral pneumonia, and fortunately for us, a couple of the cases in those archives at the AFIP were from people who died of the primary pneumonia, because otherwise we would never have gotten any sequence of the virus.
Right, okay.
It was very...
What a fascinating story.
It was just a privilege to work on it.
Wow. Well, Ann, it's been so fascinating. I love coming back here. I don't care where your office is. It could be anywhere in the world. It's a wonderful thing to be in the office of the National Centre of Science Education. How can people find out more? Where can they visit?
NCSE.com on the web. We have lots of information there. And, of course, if you become a member... You can get our newsletter every 3 months. And the newsletter now really focuses on what are we doing for teachers, how are our booster clubs doing, what kinds of flare-ups have we dealt with, and what's been the outcome of legislation across the United States and sometimes around the world. So the newsletter is a great way to keep up to date with what we're doing. And of course the website is very rich.
Yeah, well, I think it's applicable for science teachers no matter where you are, from Australia to the United States to everywhere. I think any science teacher would do well to visit your site. Once again, Ann, pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It was great to see you again.
join us next week for the final in our series of interviews with Talks with Ann Reid, where Ann will discuss the community outreach of the National Centre for Science Education. And now, direct from the cafe at Australia's Science Channel, it's Brew Ha Ha. Science in less time than it takes to order a coffee. With Ben Lewis.
If pop culture told me one thing, it's that Tyrannosaurus Rex was a fast runner that could easily chase down humans and sprint off. But like so much of my childhood, pop culture was wrong. Because it turns out that T-Rex was nowhere near as fast as we've been told. By simulating the skeleton and movement of a T-Rex, researchers have discovered that the quickest it could have moved was a fast walk, topping out at about 20 kilometres an hour. If it had tried to run, the forces through its leg bones would have been too much and they would have snapped. So less like a menacing run, more like a power walk. But that's okay, because T-Rex didn't need to be a quick runner, they just needed to be quicker than their prey. And 20 kilometres an hour is still pretty quick by human standards. It's about the same speed that most people can sprint, so you need to be on your game to get away from one. So if you do find yourself being chased by a T-Rex, forget trying to outrun it, just jump in a car.
For more Brew Ha Ha and Australian science, visit www.australiascience.tv or visit Australia's Science Channel on Facebook. It's the Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robertson.
Hello everyone, Heidi Robertson from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. A couple of weeks ago, the Australian government released some data on potentially preventable hospitalisations, sorted by primary healthcare networks across Australia. The data include vaccine preventable diseases. Jane Hansen from the Daily Telegraph wrote an article which appeared online on July the 23rd, 2017, titled "Patients Lacking Vaccination Spend on Average Nearly a Week in Hospital." Quote, "Anti-vaxxers and vaccination slackers suffering from preventable diseases are clogging Australia's hospitals and putting a massive burden on the public health purse. People with vaccine-preventable diseases spent a total of 338,686 days in hospital across the nation in 2015 to 2016, new figures reveal. And in New South Wales, 3 of the top 4 areas where preventable diseases put people in hospital were in northern New South Wales communities, where vaccination rates are notoriously low. The average length of stay in hospital for a vaccine-preventable disease was 6.7 days per patient, according to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare's new Healthy Communities report into potentially preventable hospitalisations in 2015 to 2016. New South Wales health figures estimate the average stay in hospital for one night is between $1,100 and $1,500, making the impost on the public purse for vaccine-preventable diseases up to $508 million a year. Lismore paediatrician Dr. Chris Ingle said he has seen firsthand the impact of vaccine-preventable diseases in children who had not been vaccinated in the region. This data reflects other data from earlier decades in countries like Japan, who stopped vaccinating for certain diseases and then saw there was a spike in infectious diseases. So it is expected, given the low rates of vaccination in northern New South Wales, Dr. Ingle said. Earlier this year, the rate of whooping cough in northern New South Wales Health District was 9 times that of the neighbouring Mid-North Coast Health District. We certainly see pertussis, whooping cough, and babies that need to be hospitalised, But we've also seen tetanus in an unvaccinated child, Dr. Ingle said. Marcus Bernardo was hospitalised for whooping cough in February at the tender age of 14 months, 4 months shy of his third booster shot for the killer cough, which severely affects the young. It got really bad and they kept him in isolation. He was very distressed, Mum Sandra Bernardo from Rydalmere said. Whooping cough is one of the hardest diseases to control by vaccination and relies on herd immunity of more than 90% to reduce the disease spread. Dr. Rachel Heap is an adult intensive care specialist who also works in the region and is a spokeswoman for the Northern Rivers Vaccine Supporters Group. I'm saddened by the figures, but unfortunately I'm not surprised because we have some of the lowest vaccination rates, so we have the highest number of hospitalisations. Each week I see people in intensive care with diseases that could have been prevented by vaccination, like influenza. We see otherwise healthy people in ICU with influenza, and some don't survive, Dr. Heap said. Last year, the Child Death Review team found that a total of 54 children had died of vaccine-preventable diseases in New South Wales in the past decade. Dr. Christine McCartney, Deputy Director of the National Centre for Immunisation and Research Surveillance, said of the 54 children who died, almost half were considered preventable if vaccination had been kept up to date. If you'd like to see the data for your area, go to myhealthycommunities.gov.au. On the homepage there is a link for interactive data for potentially preventable hospitalisations in Australia. That's it for me for this week. Until next time, this is Heidi Robertson from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters, signing off.
From the dawn of time, one podcast has unlocked the secrets of science and technology to enrich the lives of billions. And now, after a year where they've unlocked the golden age of knowledge, they're about to hit warp speed and go stratospheric.
Wait, hold up.
On Oh No, Ross and Carrie, we don't make extraordinary claims, we investigate them.
We go undercover with fringe religious groups, investigate paranormal claims, and we participate in pseudoscientific medical treatments and then report our findings to you.
And yes, we've even investigated Scientology.
Shh, Ross, shh. New episodes every month at MaximumFun.org.
Oh No, Ross and Carrie. They show up so you don't have to.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. What a packed episode it was this week. And as I said at the top of the show, there are even more updates to this vaxxed story. So many, in fact, that I'm going to add some links to the show notes. The radio announcer in Melbourne, Neil Mitchell, ran an interview with John Cunningham about the vaxxed movie, and John was spat at, apparently, by the anti-vaxxers. Here in Sydney, the Conservative, I will say, radio commentator Ray Hadley made a very strong statement about the anti-vaxxers, saying he would never have them on his program. So he told them not to bother writing or calling. He just won't have them on the show, which was a very strong statement indeed. The Sun Herald newspaper from Melbourne published a whole story about the cult of the anti-vaccination movement, including the fact that at these screenings of the movie Vaxxed, one of the books being flogged was Melanie's Marvelous Measles, the book that encourages children to get infected with measles. It's something out of Monty Python, it really is. Well, I wish it was that funny. And finally, this has been brought to my attention. This is a press release from the Honourable Christian Porter MP, Minister for Social Services. And the media release says, "No jab, no pay lifts immunisation rates." Published on the 31st of July 2016, And briefly, the media release says more than 5,738 children whose parents are receiving childcare payments and were previously registered as vaccine objectors have had their children immunised since the launch of the government's no jab, no pay policy. Importantly, since the launch of the campaign on the 1st of January 2016, more than 148,000 children who were not up to date with their immunisations on the Australian Childhood Immunisation Register are now meeting the requirements. The press release goes on, but I'll link to that in this week's show notes. So we do fear that impressionable young parents and others will be swayed by the utter nonsense portrayed in this Vaxxed movie. As you heard from the audio clips, this whole argument put up by the anti-vaxxers that they're just pro-choice is absurd. Of course they're anti-vaccination, vehemently anti-vaccination. They live in the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories on top of conspiracy theories. And to liken them to a cult is actually not unreasonable. It is not an unreasonable stance to take to liken these people to a cult. And it would be easy to get downhearted, but according to that press release, the immunisation rates are up. So, in your face, Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network and Vaxxed. Well, coming up on next week's show, a special extended Maynard report. Maynard at Skeptics in the Pub. We had a great time at Sydney Skeptics in the Pub just a few days ago. We had a series of psychic tests. We had Zener cards. We had water divining, and we had predicting the future with heads and tails, a famous or a favourite of pub games or party games. And there were prizes along the way, and lots of people showed up to try their skill at the psychic tests. Anyway, Maynard was our man on the spot, doing running commentary along the way and talking to people involved in doing the tests and taking the tests. A lot of fun. Skeptics in the Pub here in Sydney is a lot of fun, and I encourage everybody who runs a Skeptics in the Pub or who would like to have a listen to next week's show to see if you can get some ideas and to hear some of the fun we have at Skeptics in the Pub. Before I go, for those people who have written in to request it, let's have another psychic test ourselves. Let's do the dice game. And for those of you who don't know, every now and then I'll roll a dice. And I can never quite figure out what's the plural and the singular. I'll just say dice, it's easier. And you see if you can use your psychic powers to predict the outcome. I have two here. I've got a 6-sided dice, and a 10-sided. Let's start with the 6 first. And since I'm now using my new fancy schmancy recording booth, I can't really roll the dice on the desk easily, so I will put it in a little container. There it goes. So start predicting. I'll give it a shake. Out of 6, and the dice has come to number 2. Right. So I'll take that one out, put in the 10-sided. There we go. So here's your chance if you didn't get number 2. Out of 10, predict away, and the dice has come to number 2 again. Well, there you go. So those people who got both right, congratulations. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter @SkepticZone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.